Wayne Smith, folks, he's not been enjoying his rugby that much. It's making news waves here in NZ. If you don't know who Wayne Smith is, former All Blacks coach, well-renowned maestro of the game, nicknamed the Professor, assistant coach, Black Ferns Rugby World Cup winning coach. He's got a pretty good rugby CV, but he's not been enjoying his rugby. He was on the All Blacks podcast the other day. They discussed a number of things, and towards the end of the podcast, he mentioned that he had switched off a rugby game at halftime for the first time in his life. He'd had enough. The game he was referring to was the Force against Highlanders game from a few weeks ago. I guess at the time they recorded the podcast, that was probably one of the more recent games. So why did he switch off that game? And does this kind of speak to deeper problems in the rugby? Is it a Super Rugby thing uniquely? Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. You guys can let us know your thoughts. It is a miserable day, by the way, here in New Zealand. There's been flood warnings. It is piddling down. Just genuinely very unpleasant. But interestingly, I watched that Force Highlanders game, and I quite enjoyed it. It's a weird one. 30 points to 17. I was quite chuffed to see an Aussie team, and especially a less fancy team like the Force, get a relatively comfortable win over the Highlanders, although the Highlanders aren't kind of that much chopped this year. But I can see where Wayne Smith is coming from. When you look back at the stats in this game, and the main talking point of this game, it was the fact that there were 5 yellow cards in that game. 3 to the Landers and 2 to the Force. So the ref was busy, and when Wayne Smith was on the podcast, one of the first things he kind of mentioned was he said, in that game that Nick Berry refed the other day. So he was kind of, I guess, directing some of his attention to the way the game was controlled more than anything else, but then he kind of also went on to the rules. He said, the players are fantastic, players are, fantastically talented and whatnot, but the way the game's being played at the moment isn't really that much of his cup of tea. Apart from the 5 yellow cards, there were 26 penalties in that game, and Wayne Smith, again, you can go listen to the podcast yourself, it's on the All Blacks YouTube channel, but he talked about how arm was always out for advantage. They would go like 8 phases with advantage, and then the advantage would get blown up, and then they would spend a lot of time going for the kick for touch, and then they would spend some time to set for a line out, and then they would do a maul, then the maul would get advantage, and it was kind of this vicious cycle, which just ended up with the referee blowing his whistle a lot. And again, I can see where he's coming from. Like, there's times when I want to watch multiple games of rugby, but I don't have that much time in the day, especially if I'm watching delayed. If you skip through all the crap, excuse my language, in rugby, all the forming of scrums, forming of lineouts, setting like for place kicks and all that kind of stuff, even just kicks for touch, you will TMO decisions, you will cut down a 2-hour plus game into sometimes less than an hour just by skip 10 seconds, skip 10 seconds, skip 10 seconds, bang, bang, bang. As soon as you see a scrum being set, skip at least 40 seconds and you're not going to miss anything. So there is a lot of wasted time. That is for sure. But this game that Wayne Smith turned off at halftime was particularly kind of bad for that kind of stuff. 5 yellow cards, 26 penalties, 30 lineouts, and 17 mauls. So it was pretty kind of heavy on that kind of stuff. But I mean, it was, I think, for 3 tries to 2. 2 of them were for the backs for the Force, and one of them was for the Highlanders, was for the backs. So it wasn't just a game. There was a penalty try, and there was, I think, kind of a close range one. So it wasn't just, maul tries. It wasn't like a hooker got a hat trick like the Crusaders got the other day. But as I said, I do see where he's coming from. But on the flip side, I watched that game and quite enjoyed it. It was my favourite game of the week. Interestingly, I wasn't even thinking to turn it off at halftime. If you are curious, he turned it off at halftime and went on to watch an animal documentary about lions in the Serengeti, which I would also find kind of an interesting one to watch. I quite like the old animal documentaries. But yeah, all the arms out, the mauls, the penalties. Wayne Smith is not a big fan. And he kind of summed things up by saying one thing he would like to change in terms of the laws is that if you're going to kick for touch, then you would have to lose possession. This would take all that attacking maul stuff out of the game. Now, that's where he kind of loses me. Like, I can get that you don't enjoy mauls, but for mine, that's a key part of the game. you need to be able to set up a maul as a potential weapon. There are teams who focus on that. There are teams who pay no attention to that. The Japanese team don't maul it a heck of a lot. Even the French don't maul it a heck of a lot. That's one of the things I like about the game, is that you can pick a team which plays to your strengths, and you can, win a game a different way from another team. You can be a team who just kicks penalties all day. The Connacht won a quarter-final the other day without scoring a try. Not that that's their style, but you can do it. And you could set up a team to win that way. You can set up a team like the English women's team, who Wayne Smith, his side, beat in the final of the World Cup. They love a maul. The maul was their absolute best weapon. I would say, was it half of their tries, or if not more, came from the mauls. That's a legit way to set up a team. You can have teams with flashy backs. You can have scrum set plays. You can have line-out set plays. You can be a team that likes to hit on the counter like the Highlanders when they won Super Rugby all those years ago. That's the great thing about rugby, right? It's not rugby league. I don't mean to tell Wayne Smith that, because he's certainly, forgotten more about rugby than I will ever know. But, yeah, teams being able to score tries in different ways, and teams being able to play the same game while being set up entirely differently, that's the fun, isn't it? Like, rugby league has got some pretty sweet skills, and he didn't mention rugby league at all. I'm putting those words in his mouth. But I don't know that any one team plays particularly like polar opposite from the other, right? You guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a league guy at all. But they all seem to be playing kind of a similar style. You run it a few times, and then if you haven't gotten far enough up the field, you kick the bloody thing, or you bomb it, or put a grubber through. That's pretty much league, isn't it? You can't have two teams which are just set up in totally different manners. I don't know. That's just kind of my take on it. Now, I will say he's kind of right in that. How do I put this? I'm a rugby guy, so I'm not really in a position to judge it. I'm going to watch rugby games and be naturally kind of positive to them. I would have thought he was the same, and as I said, it's the first time in his life he says he's turned off a game at half-time. And I can remember some particularly bad rugby games. Like, I remember watching the Blues play the Reds back in 2016. It was like 25-25. It was an awful game. There was an unbelievable amount of drop ball. And the Reds scrum just kept pummeling the Blues, but the Blues were better in every other area of the park. Like, that one bad game is absolutely burned into my memory. So a bad game of rugby can be pretty bad. But as I said, I'm not probably the guy to judge whether the games are that bad. I generally both, I feel that Super Rugby on-field product has been pretty good this year. Crowd attendance and whatnot are still a bit lacking. Atmosphere's a bit lacking. But the on-the-field product, I thought, has been pretty good. As I said, I'm the wrong guy to ask about this. I was talking to my brother the other day about Marvel movies, because he's a massive Marvel movie fan. And I was kind of like, aren't you a bit sick of the Marvel movies? Like, they're all pretty much the same. I'm getting bored of them. I can't go and see them anymore. And he was just like, looked at me like I was insane. Like, why would you not want to see the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie? It's awesome. The new Ant-Man movie, it's fantastic. I have no interest in seeing those things, because I've kind of had my fill. But maybe that's where some people are at with the way rugby is at the moment. My mother, certainly, who's a kind of ardent Blues and All Black supporter, she's not watching much Super Rugby anymore, because essentially she's not real happy with some of the stuff that Wayne Smith's pointing out. But yeah, I didn't think that game was that bad one. I thought it was a pretty entertaining product. But as I said, there's certainly areas rugby could improve in terms of speeding the game up. I do think they are trying to move that way in terms of the laws. But yeah, it's certainly very much a work in progress. I don't agree that taking the maul out of the game or like penalising teams, like losing possession for a touch kick. I don't think that's right. They asked some of the Crusaders play out about it, and Joe Moody just rubbished it and said that's nonsense. Basically, he's entitled to his opinion, but as a prop, Joe Moody didn't agree. I think they said that the Crusaders forwards coach basically just said if you did that, if you surrendered possession for kicking for touch, you'll just see more teams taking shots at goal. So yeah, there'll always be kind of unintended consequences to law changes, but certainly some valid points from the professor. But Going to have to choose to disagree with him on a couple. You guys let us know your thoughts. What do you reckon? I mean, Super Rugby is not notorious for yellow cards compared to like the other main league I follow is the URC. I checked out how many yellow cards per game. I think Super Rugby is at like 1.3 yellow cards per game. The URC across their season was like 1.2, so it's kind of much of a muchness. You watch a rugby game, there's a pretty decent chance you'll see a yellow card at least at one point. Odds of seeing 5 are pretty slim. But sometimes if teams keep infringing, you need to throw the cards at them. So, and that can open up some space, make it a bit more like rugby league. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts. And yes, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.